developments tonight in an Amber Alert issued last night for a 7-month-old baby. She was abducted by a sex offender in Danville.
Tonight we learned there was a possible sighting of the two. Police initially thought the pair could be headed to Hampton Roads, but according to the latest information from state police, the suspect may have been spotted in the area of Seven Springs, North Carolina.
And that was around 6:30 this evening. Robert Boyd joins us with more.
Well, according to police, the child was abducted at a gas station in Danville, Virginia, around 8 o'clock last night. Now, earlier tonight, that abductor was possibly seen about 150 miles away in Seven Springs, North Carolina, and now it is believed he could be heading to Oak Island, North Carolina, next. The man police are looking for is 51-year-old Carl Ray Kennedy, a convicted sex offender out of North Carolina who had most recently been living in Asheboro. According to authorities, on Sunday evening, Kennedy abducted his own daughter, 7-month-old Emma Grace Kennedy. As you can see from these surveillance photos, Kennedy is accused of holding up the child's mother at knife point at a quick stop gas station in Danville, Virginia. He then kidnapped the child and fled the scene in a gold 4-door Suzuki with North Carolina tags FAA 1873. The child is believed to be in extreme danger. Kennedy is described as 5'8", 170 pounds, with tattoos on both arms. On his left arm, he has a tattoo of a skull and a wizard. On his right arm, he has a skull with a bandana over its mouth and a pit bull. He was last seen wearing a brown t-shirt and gray shorts. As for Emma, she was last seen wearing a blue onesie. She is listed as about 2'2", 18 pounds, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Now, if anyone out there has any information on this case, you're being urged to call the Danville Police Department or Virginia State Police. Robert Boyd, 13 News Now.
Robert, thank you. We have new information tonight about a woman found shot to death in Suffolk. Police say they are now classifying the death as a homicide. They identified the victim as 23-year-old Kiara Etheridge of Norfolk. Her body was found in the roadway early this morning at Dill Road and Bidwell Street. We're told detectives are following up on several leads. An elderly woman died after an alleged drunk driver hit her in Virginia Beach. A 35-year-old man from Florida is charged with DWI, involuntary manslaughter, and hit and run. He's accused of hitting and killing 73-year-old Maria Fox of Virginia Beach. The crash happened just before 10 o'clock last night on North Great Neck Road near River Road. After the collision, police say the suspect and a passenger in his car ran, but police caught them shortly afterwards. The driver is in jail tonight with no bond. A highly controversial U.S. Supreme Court decision was announced today. Justices sided with a Colorado baker who would not make a wedding cake for a gay couple.
The vote was 7-2. After the ruling, the couple at the center of the debate said they would keep fighting.
Obviously, we're disappointed in today's ruling. This entire time, all we've been doing is fighting for the right to be treated equally.
The Colorado Civil Rights Commission said the baker was wrong and that he had violated the couple's rights.
Today, the High Court decided the commission actually violated the baker's rights under the First Amendment because the commission had an anti-religious bias against the baker. Reporter Leanne Melendez has more on the controversy.
Ironically, the rainbow flag was raised outside of San Francisco City Hall for Pride Month on the day the Supreme Court ruled against a gay couple who wanted a Colorado baker to create their wedding cake. The decision outraged many city leaders.
Hey, we can't even get a wedding cake. What is this? 7-2.
Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor dissented. The case involved a gay couple, David Mullins and Charlie Craig, who asked Colorado baker Jack Phillips to design a cake for their wedding. Phillips refused, stating that it was against his religious faith. The couple took its complaint to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which decided that Phillips discriminated against them. But led by Justice Anthony Kennedy, the other 6 justices agreed that from the beginning, the commission was hostile towards the baker's religious beliefs.
The First Amendment's free exercise clause requires that there shall not be government preference or hostility toward religion.
Jason Clark is the chairman of the San Francisco Republican Party.
I think all Americans can find comfort in this ruling in that the government has to give you a fair, neutral, and respectful hearing.
The majority of the justices felt that because the Colorado Commission was not impartial, the Supreme Court could not address the bigger issue of whether a business can refuse to serve gay and lesbian couples.
So NCLR and other legal organizations will be there for the next case and the next situation, and at some point the Supreme Court is going to have to address this issue head on, but they did not do that today.
Now, appeals in similar cases are pending, including one at the Supreme Court from a florist who did not want to provide flowers for a same-sex wedding. Congressman Bobby Scott issued a statement against today's ruling. He says the ruling highlights the need for Congress to ensure that the LGBT community will have equal protection under the law, so that the right to religious liberty will not be used as an excuse to discriminate.
Family Foundation of Virginia spoke out in support of the ruling, saying religious hostility has no place in a pluralistic society like ours. The court rightly saw religious bigotry and named it as such. The foundation says business owners should not be driven out because they hold an unpopular view of marriage. Another President Trump's tweets is raising eyebrows. Earlier, he tweeted that he has the absolute right to pardon himself.
He was referring to the investigation into Russian meddling. So we set out to verify the president's claim that he can absolutely pardon himself. Our founding fathers wrote the presidential pardon into our Constitution. According to the duties of the president, it says he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons except in cases of impeachment.
But here's what experts say about pardon rights. For one, presidents cannot override an impeachment. They also can't forgive crimes committed at the state level or civil cases. And legal experts agree presidents cannot pardon future crimes, but they can pardon before a suspect is convicted. Legal experts say the Constitution does not prohibit self-pardons.
But just as judges can't oversee their own cases, the president also should not pardon himself.
President Trump can try to pardon himself, but there is no guarantee the pardon will stand. So we can verify that President Trump's claim that he is absolutely able to pardon himself is false.
Tonight, an FBI agent could face charges for some dance moves that ended badly at a Denver nightclub. His gun fell from his holster after he did a backflip. The gun went off and a man at the club was shot. ABC's Danya Backus has the story.
It looks like your typical club scene. A man showing off his dance moves in front of a Denver nightclub crowd until he goes for a backflip and his handgun goes into the air. As he picks it up, it goes off, the bullet striking an innocent bystander.
He grabbed his upper thigh and he started screaming, "Someone call 911."
Watch it again. As he reaches for the weapon, you see that muzzle flash.
It was very traumatic for us. You know, I thought my fiance got shot, so I was panicking. When I realized it wasn't him, I was still panicking because there was a man covered in blood.
Denver police say the man whose gun discharged is an FBI agent. After the gun fires, the agent picks it up, puts it back in his waist, lifts his hands, and casually walks away.
At no point did I see anyone trying to fess up to what had happened. As far as I'm concerned, he made no effort whatsoever to take care of the victim.
Police say charges are possible against the agent, and they're waiting on lab results to tell them if he had been drinking.
The protocol is not to bring a gun in on your person if you are going to be drinking. And the most important thing to do is to ensure that your gun is secured.
The shooting victim is expected to be fined, and the FBI says it will hold the agent accountable. Danya Backus, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Starbucks chairman Howard Schultz is stepping down after joining the company more than 30 years ago. During that time, Starbucks transformed into a powerful company with more than 28,000 locations around the world. Schultz stepped down as CEO last year to focus on innovation and social impact projects. He'll take the title of Chairman Emeritus. Schultz says he is considering a range of options for his future, from philanthropy to public service. He is writing a book about Starbucks' social impact efforts. He endorsed Hillary Clinton last year and did not rule out running for office.